待会儿超1:10没关系，因为最后一场，看看，对，看看这个要讲多久都没关系。
好，辛苦大家了。呀、
好，那我们开始了。
OK，
好吧。Okay, great. On to our final workshop session, our featured workshop session on Logart at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. Let us welcome Dr. Shih Pei Chen. Dr. Shih Pei Chen is a DH specialist with a focus on digital historical research and digital sinology. Dr. Chen is a computer scientist by training, and she has been working with historians to develop digital research applications and methodologies for more than 15 years. She is currently senior research scholar and IT researcher at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, and she leads projects that range from research-oriented tools, the development of such tools such as Logart, which we will hear about today, and also geospatial and visual analysis, such as CHMAP, to technical research infrastructure development, such as Rise and Shine, and new forms of publishing historical datasets, such as digital concordances. Dr. Chen also serves on various editorial, adversarial, and reviewing boards for journals, conferences, research projects, and funding agencies in the field of digital humanities. So this will be the final workshop of the day, and I've just shared the workshop description once again in the chat box, and let's give the floor to Dr. Shih Pei Chen, who will be talking about collecting historical big data from Chinese local gazetteers with Logart. Thank you.
Thank you, Lincoln, for giving us this chance to talk to the audience in Hong Kong, in CTU, and in East Asian in general, to give us the chance to introduce Logart. Today, my colleague Ye Guilin, Kelvin Ye, is also in the audience. That he is the main developer actually behind Logart. So if you have some immediate questions when I wasn't clear in my presentation, then please go ahead to ask questions in the chat, and he will try his best to answer you. Yeah. So today, like Lincoln said, that we are thinking about collecting historical big data. And here the big is a relative term, because comparing to the general big data that the sciences or especially the computer scientists and also like the web, like they are crawling resources from the web, historical data tend to be relatively small. But here, when we are talking about historical context, then what we can do from, for example, Chinese local gazetteer is already considered historical big data. So let's start. So today's focus, I will introduce Logart, but in the program that Lincoln very kindly put together, you can find also actually some past videos that we made for really to introduce you step by step how to use Logart and what it can do. So normally that kind of session would really take like from at least 90 minutes. And sometimes like for in-house scholars, we would do several days of workshop because there are really a lot of features or facilities in Logart. So here I will focus only on the philosophy behind Logart. So why it is different from the already existing large commercial and sometimes public 方志库 or databases, and also why it is also even like different from the general historical databases. What is the difference? And basically its philosophy is that we want to promote a way of using all the digital gazetteers as a genre. and as a conceptual database for asking questions. So that means we don't want to promote again the individual checking up certain very specific gazetteer to look up for information. We don't want that anymore because now we have digital text and digital metadata. So what we want to do is collectively treating this genre as a whole body for to answer our questions. So we call that collective analysis. And that would enable scholars also to collect historical data from the digital gazetteers. And so I will basically walk you through this idea, and then I will give some very short demonstration of our user interfaces so that you have a feeling of how it looks like and how to play around with it. But if you are really interested in following along, then you can probably use our pre-recorded video where we give hands-on tutorials about each feature. And also one thing that I would love to do today is to echo the theme that Lincoln very nicely put together, that is to rethinking datafication of culture in the Chinese world. So by collecting data, historical big data from local gazetteers, do I mean that we are like we ignore the so-called like qualitative analysis, and then we go for only statistical or like very quantitative analysis? So I think this is a very good, very important point that we need to address, especially how to interpret historical data that we got from any historical sources. So I will go to that at the end. Yeah, so for those who are not so familiar with local gazetteers, I would like to give a very brief introduction. So in Chinese, it's called 地方志, and this is the main genre for recording local knowledge in historical China since at least the Southern Song Dynasty or the 12th century. Here I'm also borrowing a definition from Joseph Dennis in his 2015 book, that local gazetteers are cumulative records about a territorial unit. And by cumulative here, it means that they don't just include the contemporary information about the local region, but also you can find historical records from most of the gazetteers. And they are mostly compiled by a local government and published in book format. So here I put forward local knowledge. So what kind of local or locality we're talking about? Most of them are administration units like counties, prefectures, provinces, and in some cases, we also have statewide local gazetteers like 大名一统制. And sometimes they are the territory that might also be about not as administration unit, but rather geographical region, for example, the 河套制, or some borderlands like 柳边纪约. And then what kind of information or knowledge that are recorded in? So gazetteer, the word gazetteer might indicate that this is about geography or topography, but actually the gazetteers, the Chinese gazetteers, they are beyond that. So aside from the topography like mountains, rivers, they also include local history, like how the local bureau or the local government was set up, and the flora and fauna of the region, the produces and commodities. Also, maybe the so-called human geography, the officials, the local people, biographies of local elites, and the local customs, and also the writings by the local either officials or local elites, like poems or other kind of literature. And to give you an even more concrete example, I pull out a very typical table of contents that is from 顺天府志 in the Ming Dynasty. And so here you can see that it has 6 gen. And the first one, 地理志, it includes maps or 分野, that is so-called field allocation, and Yenge, the history, the Jiangyu, the territory, and the customs, the mountains and rivers. And then in Jianzhi, or I translated into infrastructure, here you can see the Chengshi, how the city look like, and what are the public bureaus in the city, and what are the schools, what are the altars and temples, postal stations, etc. And then it comes with the Shihuozhi, where you can find all the local products and the household taxes and the politics. You can find the officials and all kinds of officials. And the Renwuzhi are mainly biographies of different kind of people, like other than the officials and local gentry. You can also find people of virtue, for example, and also like the foreigners and the xianren, yeah. And then Yiwenzhi is also like very popular. So there are some very unique, distinguished characteristics of local gazetteers as a genre that makes it ideal for employing digital methods. So the first characteristic of that is the data nature. So each local gazetteers can be understood as a data collection project that the compilers, when they started such compilation, the first thing they do is to collect relevant data. And those data comes with a set of topics that like what we just saw before, the geography, the mountains, the local products, people, etc. So each gazetteer is actually a small database by itself. And that is for people from the contemporary period or later period to find relevant data about. And the second distinguished characteristic of local gazetteer is its structure. That normally, like I think 99% of the gazetteers are guided by categories rather than, for example, chronology that people can see from maybe the official history or other kinds of writing. And to our surprise, that these kind of categories over 800 years of time, from its early time to the very later time, like in the Qing dynasty or in even the Republic period, that those categories are actually very consistent. So here I'm listing the top 20 section, like most popular section headings from 4,000 gazetteers that we collect the table of contents from. So the first two are functional, so they are popular maybe for very obvious reasons. But then from the third one, the 人物译文、风俗、学校、古迹、城市、物产、选举、疆域、山川 etc. 烈女、严格、建制、田赋 and etc. So all those occupies like at least 40% in the 4,000 titles. So it means that for every 5 gazetteer that you randomly pick and read, at least two of them, you will find these titles. So that's a very consistent structure. Of course, each gazetteer, actually their table of contents all look a bit different. And some of the gazetteer, they have sections that cannot be found in other gazetteers. Because like to reflect their regional specialties. Yeah, for example, 木正, the wood logging, or the wood management that you can probably only find in certain very fewer gazetteers. But after, like, all in all, that this kind of consistency, that you can find a category of topic or a category of data from most of the gazetteers, that is phenomenal. And also that when it comes down to how exactly the data are organized, lists are actually the format for organizing information that is often seen, like in the gazetteer when it comes down to 物产 or when it comes down to the local officials, for example. And here I'm showing you an example from the Shanjing Xianzhi, like under Wuchan, they give you subcategories of the kind of local producers that one can find or expect to find. And then also under a specific category, for example, here, the grains, they give you all the grains that you can find in this region. And they also give you some further information like where, like when you can harvest it, or yeah, what it looks like, etc. And these are actually all lists. Like they have very regular data points. They have a name and they have some kind of description in it. And then the third distinguished characteristic of local gazetteer is its comprehensiveness. So it is indeed a common practice for in historical China, in local government, to record local information, that it lasts at least 800 years of time, and it covers very wide geographical coverage. So for that means for a region that either that is well populated or even less well populated, you can almost always find a gazetteer that record the local information. So in terms of data collection, that is really a very unique situation. And also there is a big portion of historical gazetteers. What I mean is pre-49 gazetteers that still exist today in libraries, in museums, and also a large subset of them has been digitized as searchable full text or digital text. So I did a estimation of the number of historical gazetteers that were ever compiled in history. And I think there are at least 12,000 of them. And 8,000 titles are distinct titles, are extant. That is according to the 地方志联合目录 done by Beijing Tianwantai. And then there are at least 3 large digital databases that are that contains a lot of local gazetteers with digital text. And I also did just a very rough estimation. At least 5,000 of them are distinct. That means at least 1/3 of historical gazetteers that were ever compiled are now digitized in digital databases. So it is statistically sufficient to use all the digital gazetteers or just a big enough subset of that to represent the overall patterns of all the gazetteers that were ever compiled. And to be specific, that means if you run a full text search, you would that would give you in a big enough subset, or so for example, one of the digital databases, it would give you a relatively accurate approximation of the term's overall distribution in all the historical gazetteers. So that is a very strong statistical quality. So what we are proposing behind LOGAR is that rather than using the gazetteers individually to look up for some information about a local place, we want to encourage scholars to use the genre collectively to answer questions about historical China. So in one sentence is to treat a genre as a database. This would help us to scale up our research so that we are not bounded by time, space, or our individual efforts in like flipping through the gazetteers, because now we have digital text and digital metadata. Here is an example that that probably can best demonstrate what I meant. So mapping locust temples. Chen Zhengxiang is a geographer in the 1960s, and I think he flipped through 3,000 local gazetteers physically. That is physically stored in Taiwan, Japan, and China, Hong Kong, to gather information or gather records about where a locust temple was, like historically recorded in local gazetteers. And he came up with the map on the left-hand side, And you can see the distribution is mainly on the Yellow River region and also some in the Yangtze River region. And he gave a geographical analysis of what this data mean. So if you're interested, please find this section to read. And in 2016, I also used a very, at that time, it was a prototype of LoGAR to run the same, to try to recreate the same map. So I did a full text search about, actually I used 4 kinds of different keywords, including Bajia Miao, Liumeng Jiangjun Miao, Chongwang Miao, and Huangshen Miao that Chen Zhenxiang gave in his section. And then I immediately get this map. So in LoGAR, we already tied up each gazetteer with a geolocation. That's why we can immediately visualize the geo distribution of any search result. And further, I can also distinguish the distribution of different kinds of temples that Chen Zhenxiang was not able to do, or he didn't realize because he simply collect the data manually. Yeah, so that's what we can do with digital tools. So LoGAR is in a way that it is from a collective analysis method to tool that we try to incorporate this method into the tool that so that any scholar can come in and then you can just throw in whatever question you have, either to use full text search or to use other kinds of search or to use tagging to try to recreate this process of collecting historical data across the digital gazetteers. And then you can get a data set that is statistically representative for the phenomenon that one can see from all the, suppose we have all the historical gazetteers. And here we also draw out a workflow. So a user or a scholar can collect historical data set via either search or tagging, and then you obtain a data set. And then in LoGAR, we incorporated several different kinds of visual statistical analysis for you to get an overview. For example, to get a temporal distribution, geographical distribution, or other kinds of distribution. And then after you see the overview, you would understand where are the unexpected or where are the expected results. And you can also then go into look into the data, and then you might be able to address your query to best reflect what you want to find, and etc. etc. And one thing is also that when people are talking about this kind of bird eye view or overview or like visualization, basically they are statistical tools because they count up how many occurrences of your search in so for example in specific time period or in specific regions. But we want to also identify that this kind of tool are also a very good reading guide for you to look into a specific snippet of the data set, because the data set or the search result tend to be huge for people to really read through. But this kind of statistical result can actually guide you through the data set to help you identify phenomenon that you didn't expect. All right, and now I'm going to show a little bit of how LoGAR look like. So we have mainly 5 interfaces or user interfaces. After you log in through this URL, you will go to this we call LG service. So this is basically the portal. And then from there, we have a table of content editor so that you can see the structure of each gazetteer. And we also have a 2 visualization, standalone visualization tool for mapping. And also we have a tagging interface. But now I would like to give you a very quick demo. And before that, let's just look at this. So I just want to show that we have 4 levels of data for people to collect information at. So the books are the gazetteers titles, and also we have sections that we type in for up to 3 levels of hierarchical table of contents. And we have page text that's a full text, and we also have pages with images. So I will now stop sharing my slide and then switch to my browser. Okay. So when you log in, so if you use the URL that Calvin pasted in, or like Lincoln also put that into the program, then you will come to a login page where you can sign up. And after you sign up and log in, what you see is that on the top, that's the main menu of our of Logard's LG service, so the portal. And at the default is the books. This is where you can see what are the books or the titles that are included in this data or in Logard. So there is always a filter area that you need to click this icon to expand. Here you can also search for example, book title, or you can limit with modern province, like you can type in Shandong, or you can type in Hong Kong, and then also the modern county. And here you can filter by dynasty, or you put in a reign period here. And also you can filter by the level of administration type. Yeah. But basically, if you don't do any filtering, then you see the whole collection. And then what you can do is that at for each record, you can see the detailed bibliography and also the source. And then you can also jump to the table of content editor to see its internal structure. But after that, if you want to have the collective analysis that I was mentioning, then one thing you can do, actually 2 things. So one is a built-in statistical view, where you can like very flexibly see the distribution of, for example, right now I'm using the dynasty, but you can also, for example, you can use the reign period, or you can use the admin type. And then you can see the distribution of these 4,410 titles. And you can also change the visualization type or the visual. And then you can then see which are the ones that you're interested in. And then you can further narrow down to see the snippet of record that you're interested in. And aside from that, you can also use we call LG map, but that is mainly a mapping tool, an interactive mapping tool that can show you all the records or any kind of search result that you can filter in the books section, or you can filter by full text search, and then you can see what are the geographical distribution of them. And you can also see a temporal distribution. And if you want, you can also do the pie chart here. Like if you want to do the source, or if you want to do again the dynasty, then you can see them here. And the good thing about this platform is that it is interactive. So when you mouse over a specific snippet, it immediately tells you what the distributions are on the map or in the timeline, or etc. etc. So that's LG map. And then for each of the different data level, that's what I call them. You can, for example, at the sections, you can run a search. For example, I can type in Shui Li, and then it will tell you how many gazetteers among the 4,000 titles contain a section on Shui Li. And then you can further either do a test tagging. Let me see. text tagging here. You can load the text and then see the text, or you can again do a mapping or do the statistics to understand like from which dynasty onward that gazetteers include such a section, or what are the general distribution, geographical or temporal distribution of that section. And similarly, you can do page text search, and then it will give you the same thing. Here I search for the 4 or 5 keywords that I just mentioned about the locus tempos. And then, sorry. And then you can again click on LGMap and immediately see the result, see the geo distribution of the result. And that helps you to understand, first of all, the overall distribution. And second of all, that also help you to dive into a specific snippet of the record. For example, if I find that, if I want to see what are the early mentionings or what are the late mentionings of those records, then I can immediately dive into them and then only focus on that snippet. And the last thing I want to show from the interface is the PWI, or the pages with images. So we did a relatively big effort to identify all the pages with images or with visual materials from the local gazetteers. From the 4,400 local gazetteers we have, and we identify 72 pages, 1,000 pages. And you can like glance them through. And we also have a group of scholars that that each of them work on a different type of image in the local gazetteers to try to understand like what is the relationship between the images, the visual materials versus the text, because after all, local gazetteers is a textual genre, but they very often also contain visual materials like maps or star maps or city layout and etc. etc. Yeah. So I will now go back to my slides. Where is my slide? Okay, here. All right. So I've gone through these. But now I want to give you some concrete examples about what I mean by collective analysis of search result, or what exactly you can do with it. So at the book level, if you like analyze or you draw, if you click on LGMap and see the geographical and temporal distribution of the whole collection, we actually have 2 collections. One is the bigger one, a commercial one with 4,000 titles. And the second one is open access, only contains 400 titles, but that's also big. And you can see the temporal distribution and also the geographical distribution of them. And that is very useful when you want to further analyze other search results that you really give a filter or type some keywords in, because this would be the baseline that you are looking at. So this is important to understand when you are interpreting any kind of search result that you are looking at, you want to focus on. And then at the sections, I give you an example. So for example, if I search in Xingye or Fenye and in the section search, and then this is what I get. So the green line represents the full collection, and the Xingye is the purple one, the Fenye is the orange one. And you can see that from the 16th century onward, Xingye and Fenye, they kind of occupy the whole collection. So if you add these 2 lines up, then it approximately reach the green line. And after a certain period, Xingye seems to be more popular than Fenye, but both are actually used until after 1900, that the 2 lines, the purple and the orange ones, add up, to only occupy maybe only less than the half of all the gazetteers in the Republican time. So that tells you something, and that's the phenomenon that scholars can dig into. But without this tool, it would be relatively difficult, maybe, to discover such phenomenon. And of course, you can input any kind of keyword to let that is interest for you. And for the full text search, here I again put in the Baja Miao example that the locust temples, they are oftentimes Baja Miao, and some of them are Liumeng Jiangjun Miao. But these two are the most frequent or most popular locust temples. And you can see that from the map, the Baja Miao, they actually occupy most, like they concentrate on most the Yellow River region, while the Liumeng Jiangjun Miao are more in the south. And from the timeline, you can even clearly see that Baja Miao is a much older tradition, and Liumeng Jiangjun Miao only started to appear from the 1600 or after 1650s. So that also indicate some kind of external force, maybe a government force, to introduce Liumeng Jiangjun Miao into the local society. Yeah, and this is the PW that I already told you about. And we recently have a working group and also a workshop where 14 scholars each wrote about a specific topic that use the visual materials in local gazetteers. And this is another interface that I didn't show you, but this is to put the visual materials, the thumbnails of the pages of local gazetteers onto the map. And then you can also layering it up with some other map layers, some other historical maps. For example, we collaborate with Shanghai Jiao Tong University to digitize and georeference 4,000 maps that were surveyed by the Republican government and Japanese government in the early 20th century for military purposes. And you can actually zoom in and load them in, and then also compare the maps that are from local gazetteers. Sorry, I forgot to put in a screenshot for that, but you can also play around with it. And maybe Calvin can also paste the link for SageMap here. But the last thing I want to quickly show you about is the test tagging. So remember that I talk about there are a lot of lists in terms of organizing the real content in local gazetteers. So those lists are actually already in a data form because they have very regular data points. Like you can always find the names of the grants or some specific features of the grants or officials. So the idea here is to have a test tagging interface that helps you to easily convert the list into a data format that can be later on used by computers. And then you can load them into an Excel spreadsheet or other kinds of spreadsheet. You can load them into a GIS software for further analysis. So here I quickly show you an example on the Shui Li section. So under this, I think this is from Yuezhou Fuzhi, and this example is from Che Chun, who is right now a senior scholar in Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Here under the Balingxian, they have Yanhongdi or like different kinds of water conservancy facilities that are listed, and under each of them, it gives the location and the when the facility was built and the width, the length, and etc. Different kinds of information. When you load the digital text into our tagging interface, this is what it would look like. So you would notice that all the formatting, all the libraries are gone, and unfortunately, And here, this is the text about on the page 718, and this is the text on another page. But visually, you can identify these are the information we want to capture, the different names of the water conservancy, and also the description, the location, etc. So we have a tagging interface that helps you to semi-automatically identify them. So for example, the name of the water conservancy, we found that they all usually end up with these characters, D, T, or To, or Yan, or Xi, or whatever. So we collect them, and then you can compile a so-called regular expression that is a way to express the repetition or the pattern of a textual string. So in this case, the name of the water conservancy, and then the LOGAR or our tagging interface or the computer can automatically identify them for you. And similarly, when we are talking about the location, 在哪里, 在二都, 在五都, 在 wherever, and also the length, 长多少丈 or 宽多少丈, the length of width, because they come with a pattern. So it is possible to express that, to write a regular expression and then tell the computer to automatically extract them or identify them. And then after these tagging, we can then convert the tagged information directly into a spreadsheet. So here you have all the names of the water conservancy in the text, and the location, the type, some destruction or construction information, and the length, the width. And here we also automatically carry out the page number where you got them, and the county where you got them, and also from which gazetteer you got them. So also the source information for you. And then you can immediately bring this to another application, like Excel spreadsheet or a GIS software to analyze them. So I would quickly end up with some case studies to tell you what are the actual implications of LOGART. So we have three kinds of implications or applications that people use LOGART for. So the first one is to use full text search to identify key patterns as a proxy for the historical presence or absence of certain phenomenon. So one of the example is Cao Ling from Nanjing 信息工程大学, that he identified like I think 53 keywords that 玉米 was called or maize was called in historical times. And then through full text search, she was able to trace the process of introduction, planting, and transmission of maize in China from the Ming Dynasty to the Qing Dynasty. And Li Fupeng and Cao Ling also worked together to trace an agriculture manual in local gazetteers to understand how local gazetteers as a local official genre contribute to the circulation of certain technological knowledge. And Jeff Snyder-Renke also used full text search to identify the infant bureaus in local gazetteers as evidence of shifts in societal attitude toward infant mortality in historical China. And Wu Huiyi also used Xiyangren and then identify a phenomenon that we didn't know about before, that most of the Xiyangren were mentioned in the Xingye section, Xingye or Fenye, showing that the local effort in using Western astrology work for building their local identity, for them to attribute themselves into the spectrum of China. And then the second use case is to use section search to either isolate the same thematic section across multiple local gazetteers, or to observe the large-scale patterns of specific sections, like the Xingye Fenye that I told you about earlier. And Ian Matthew Miller also used section search to focus on forestry sections and to chart the development of administrative structure that have governed the logging industry and its associated taxation. And both me and Zhu Pingsi 老师 from Taiwan Tsinghua University also try to bring up the larger picture of, and then what we do is we analyze the data categories that is employed by the whole genre to try to unwrap the underlying knowledge system, and also to answer what is considered local knowledge by local gazetteers. And the third one is to use the tagging interface to tag text from multiple gazetteers to collect and compile standalone data sets that serve as a curated digital concordance for reuse and further investigation. So one of the example that we saw earlier is from Chechun, that she tagged all the water conservancy constructions in the middle stream of the Yangtze River, and mainly in the Dongtinghu region, to recover the change of landscape over 300 years of time of the Dongting Lake. And Joe Dennis also tagged many book holdings in the school libraries that they tell you the list of the books that is stored in local school library. And he tagged 30,000 records. And this would be very useful to map the circulation of books and knowledge that is stored within the formal space of learning. And one thing that he realized is that people often think that in the 现学 or 府学, there are only book titles that are directly relevant to the national exam that are stored there. But what he found is actually there are many other titles that are stored that one can also find from school libraries. And Scott also used tagging to find the reconstruction of Buddhist sites for other purposes. So the concluding remark. So we are talking about historical data and interpretation. So the main thing that we propose is to treat a genre as a database to answer questions, rather than using the local gazetteers individually to look up for information. But one thing that is very crucial is that after we collect such data, we shouldn't expect that they reflect the facts, or they reflect what was actually happened in the historical time. So we need to understand this, the nature of this genre, that we need to treat the genre itself also as a object for our studies, to understand that what kind of information eventually accumulated in this genre. Definitely not everything. So this is definitely what is recorded doesn't necessarily reflect the fact. So, and what is not recorded are not recorded there. So you need to have a critical thinking and historical understanding about the genre in order to properly interpret the data that you collect from the local gazetteers or from any historical genre. Dagmar Schiffer, so my department director, and Chechun and me, we did a exemplary study on mulberry tree related disaster, or called Sangzai, that is reported in local gazetteers. So here you can see a very outstanding phenomenon, that most of those Sangzai mentioned in local gazetteers are focusing on the northern plain of China. But actually, Sangzai are directly related to silk production. Why people planted mulberry? Because they want to produce silk. But the major center for silk production in historical China is actually in the Yangtze River region. But why Sangzai are mostly reported here? So that's some phenomenon that we cannot, that shows very clearly that we cannot be we cannot just assume that this reflects all the facts. about our historical time, and then just interpret it in the very naive way. And the other thing I also want to point out is that if we look at the temporal distribution of the mulberry tree disasters, we would understand that the gray areas are the Yuan dynasty. So Ming gazetteers report have like 50% of their mulberry disasters are from the Yuan. And Qing also, Mingguo also. So that means that in general, like all the mulberry disaster records from local gazetteers are from the Yuan dynasty that one can find in local gazetteers. What does that mean? Does it really reflect that Yuan is really a disastrous dynasty in all different aspects, and even in mulberry tree related planting? No, that actually reflect a state compensation mechanism that was used during the Yuan dynasty. So I think this gives a very clear indication of how we should interpret data that are collected from historical sources, even with LOGART's help. So with LOGART, it is now possible to collect historical big data for analysis that is relatively quick than manually collection. But we shouldn't be like misguided and just think that those historical records are reflecting the truth or reflecting truly what's happened before. And the other thing I want to mention is, do we mean that like with all the statistical overview of that LOGART introduced, or what you can see from many of the digital humanities projects, does that mean that we want to introduce datification of history record into historical records? I think this is one point that maybe we can discuss later. Thank you. Lincoln, I couldn't really hear you. I'm not sure what's happening. Is it my problem or?
No. Lincoln, I can't hear him either. I can see
Okay.
Hello?
Lips are
Do
moving.
you hear me?
Now we
Okay.
Now, yes. Super.
I was just trying to thank you, and thank you very much for this. And I think it's a great way to conclude our full day of presentations and workshop sessions and discussions. Let us collect questions and comments from the audience, shall we? And while everyone is typing or thinking of our reflections, let me say, these thoughts on the local gazetteer genre as a database and its potential, these are really stimulating thoughts. And also thank you for the walkthrough of the suite of tools of LOGART. And I also really liked your final word of caution about taking representations of the historical fact in these records as the actual historical fact. And that is, of course, something we need to think hard and be careful of. Simon, yes, do you want to go first again?
Thank you. Thank you for an excellent presentation, a fantastic project. So much work. Actually, I was going to say I was just preempted by because I was going to say exactly the same thing. The big danger, I think, is a naive approach. It's really good that you brought that up, because there is this the worry about the old black box, particularly from the students and from less experienced researchers, that it's all a mystery what goes in inside it. There's something at one end and you type in something and something comes out. But absolutely right. And just to reinforce what I think I was saying, it's really, really important to have an understanding of what your data represents. It's what we always say to our students: be aware of what your data is. What does your data represent? Yeah, not just have a naive and just a simple accepting view of what comes out of it. That's all I wanted to say, other than thank you very much. So I've given time for other people to come up with their questions, but thank you. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Totally agreed, and that is really not in a different vein from how historians approach our sources, right? We always, of course, need to be mindful and critical of what we are reading, and now, sort of in another way, we are also doing that for our data.
Yeah, historians are trained in that way. That's the issue. Many other humanities students are not trained in that way, to look very, very closely at the data.
And a question that I see in the chat box is related to this from Kelly Liu. And she's asking, as a history student and not familiar with CS, would it be a good idea to transfer to the CS subject to learn DH? Or would you recommend us to learn by ourselves?
I actually think digital humanities won't be a thing in 20 years because it will be incorporated into the disciplines already by then. So which means that the young students now, you are born in a digital age, and your ability of understanding how computers work and how to interpret the things you see from the internet is already much stronger than senior scholars. So what I would recommend is really that in historical discipline, or in universities, that such teaching of digital thinking, or not necessarily programming, I would say, because yeah, I think to do programming, it is another thing. It's like a career. So but to have the kind of digital thinking to make you realize what computers can do and what are the pitfalls that computers might bring to you. Like, for example, when we are looking at such visualization or such mapping, or when you run some kind of computational analysis to digital text, what might be the pitfalls that the computers cannot depict for you. So I think to learn that kind of digital thinking would be crucial in historical studies. And so I would totally encourage all historical departments to incorporate such training in their syllabus.
Especially in this sort of transitional period, that you have characterized, DH as really a transition towards being incorporated into the humanities itself. And the other question in the chat box from Guang Wei Zhang.
Maybe he can, because it's really relatively long.
So he's read your paper on GIS on the visual materials, and he asks about georeferencing. So have you tried to locate and recognize place names from these sorts of sources, such as historical maps? And do you think it's important to do this kind of work?
I know there are a lot of efforts that are done by Fudan University and Harvard University jointly in the project called CHGIS. So that's the Chinese historical GIS project, where they use textual and also visual map sources to redraw the boundaries and identify historical places and their modern geo coordinates. So I think those work are already, like most of them are done. And of course, a lot can still be done. That, for example, I know a scholar in Macau University. He's working on the general maps of the Qing Dynasty that covers the whole empire. And because many of the place names are in Manchu, so he's working with Leiden University also to try to geo-reference those big maps, like very large scale map, sorry, small scale map, because yeah, but large maps that cover the whole Qing Empire, and then try to identify the historical place names and their geolocations on the map. So I think, yes, that would be very, very crucial, especially from what we see in CHGIS, that all those like 20 years of work involving like dozens of scholars in in Fudan and at Harvard, that they actually provide all the other Chinese historians or like Chinese scholars to have a solid digital infrastructure to work on. That is also why in our LOGAR system or in our project, we are able to draw out the historical coordinates for historical place names relatively easily. And then we can like immediately generate the maps for your search result on the fly. So those words are really crucial.
Thank you, Professor Chen. And of course, I want that, yes, georeference is, for the Chinese historical map is not that possible. And for the Fudan University and Harvard University on the CHGS, there are so many small places are not included in this kind of database, especially for the historical maps extracted from the Chinese local gazetteers. So what we are working on is to use the OCR, and I'm majoring in artificial intelligence and combined with digital humanities. So we are using the OCR technology to locate and recognize this kind of places names from the historic maps, different kinds of historic maps. And we want to make this kind of historical archives to be searchable. So for example, if you want to know a village or a town in the history, we can use this kind of yes, maybe integrated into the LOGA or other kind of WebGIS or historical GIS. So thank you. I think I get very good, important ideas from your people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a very important and crucial word. So right now in LOGAR, our coordinates are actually only at the county seats level or prefectural seats. So in a way that we can roughly identify if you find, for example, a temple in local gazetteers, we use the county seat or the prefectural seat to represent it on the map. So in a way that it is not accurate. So if you are able to provide further like low level, detailed level coordinates for historical place names, that would be really, really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and especially for generating more fine-grained maps and analysis and visualizations. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to incorporate that into LOGAR. I think you should like publicize it somewhere. And then of course, then LOGAR would approach you and to try to acquire the data set from you so that our scholars can also use it from within LOGAR. But you should
yes,
like
I
really,
agree with that.
Yeah.
Maybe we can, we will publish it and release as a basic or infrastructure in the future.
Fantastic, thank you.
Another query from Kelly Liu. on the database by Shanghai Jiaotong. I think what you mentioned include two things, right? You mentioned the Shanghai, right, the Fudan and the Harvard CHGIS project, and also on to you.
Yeah, the other one. Yeah, the other one is called CHMap, and maybe Kelvin can help me to put the link in. So do we still have time?
Yes.
Okay, then why don't I just share my screen to show you a little bit on that? Because it's not so easy to just talk from thin air. Yeah, seeing is easier. So this is CHMap. So basically you can type CHMap and MPIWG, and I think you can like, yeah, or you can just remember the link that Kelvin put in the chat. So basically this is the interface. And if I, okay, so maybe this would make it larger. So right now I am using it to plot some images that I searched from the Logard, and then I so the visual materials from Logard. So these ones are I believe they are retro implements, I think. Yeah, but if we only look at CHMap itself, it is a standalone tool. So if you type in the URL, and then what you can do is like here on the right hand side, there is a set of land survey maps that are digitized by MPI and also Shanghai Jiaotong University. And these maps are the survey map that were produced by the Republican government or the Japanese government. Like in different cases, they are different. So if I check some of the provinces, then I see some things are loading, and then you can zoom in. So I'm actually not familiar with this region. I'm just zooming in. And so basically what you can see is these kind of maps. So here might be a city. Yeah, okay. So they we digitize it in a way that it is you can zoom in to see very clear images. And this set of maps are actually published by a Japanese publisher, 科学书院. So they are called I think, let me see, about here. Yeah, they are called 中国大陆5万分之一地图集成, and there are 8 volumes, and they contain 4,044 maps, I think. And we basically digitize them in very high quality, and then we georeference them in a very simple way that we only do 4 corners. So basically to put a paper map onto Google Map, and then or some web GIS platform, so that you can have a relative have the relative location of each of the maps. Now you don't see the border, but they are actually like piece by piece maps. So this is the collection that I was talking about. And here, if you scroll down, actually the same collection also exists in Academia Sinica. So I think Academia Sinica has maybe 2,000 such maps. And then, so sorry, I'm zoomed in on the same direction, on the wrong direction. Okay. Okay, so if you scroll down here, and then you can also see the ones that are publicized by Academia Sinica, that they also did digitization of their collection and georeference them. And then they provided publicly by the standard WMTS protocol, that is a data sharing protocol for maps that has long established in the GIS world. So you can also compare these 2 sets of maps. They have different coverage, but you can play around with them. Does that answer your question?
I believe it does. Yes. Any other questions? We'll have to wrap up fairly quickly. So final questions for Dr. Chen. Anyone?
It's okay. It's a long day.
Has been, but I believe it is a pretty fruitful day for myself, and I hope for all of you. So thank you very much, Shih Pei. And of course, I hope this final workshop session serves as an encouragement for you all to try more of the online tools, the platforms, and to think about the ways we could use this data in such ways in our research and study and teaching. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, thank you all. Thank you all for taking part in our online workshop today. Like what Professor Cheng, department head, mentioned, we will be organizing more DH events in the future and possibly a conference of a larger scale next year. So please stay tuned and I'll keep you all updated on our future initiatives related to digital humanities, and hope to see you all again, and of course hopefully here in person in Hong Kong, preferably, right? And as a final note, let me also say some words of thanks. Many thanks to all our excellent speakers. Some of you joined in short notice, and I'm deeply grateful for this. And also thanks to my department, the Department of Chinese and History in City U, and also to our head for support and leadership. And also I'm very grateful to my colleagues. Thanks to Virginia, Shirley, Vivian for their admin support, and to Rosita for the poster design. And the student helpers who are here in the Zoom session here, labeled as helper 1 and 2 here in the session, Bianca and Howard. None of this would be possible with all of your support and help. Thank you very much. And yes, Shih Pei's email in the chat box if you have questions. Yes, thank you very much for these. And this would be the end of our workshop today. I hope we've all thought of some things about datafication for the study of Chinese culture, Chinese history, Chinese literature, and so on and so forth. And I hope to see you soon again. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye. Take care.
Thank you so much, Lincoln. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you all. And I'll be in touch again for those who have been speaking at this conference. I'll be in touch very shortly on arrangements and so on. Thank you all.
好，谢谢哦。
谢谢。